welcome to episode 9 of Attention Engineer. I'm Laura Kidd, a Bristol-based music producer, songwriter and independent solo artist making music as Penfriend. Find me around the internet at Penfriend Rocks. In this noisy world, the gift of someone's attention is priceless, so thank you for listening today. I'm on a quest to go deeper, past the headlines and the hearsay, to have the conversations I've always hoped for with some of the artists I admire the most. This podcast is supported by Arts Council England and the National Lottery, and powered by the Correspondence Club. More on that later. Hello you, how's it going? I'm feeling fresh and energised today. I did a speedy run first thing and have had just the right amount of coffee before sitting down to say hello to you. Greetings from the Launchpad, where I've been spending my recent days working on angry songs and lining up more exciting guests for this podcast. Hooray! Last week I shared a blog post about my new monthly tracker system, which you can read at penfriend.rocks/letterbox. I really don't think processes and productivity are discussed enough outside the super businessy sphere of life, which is a bit strange because to me life is one long balancing act of work and home and exercise and social life and hobbies and education and everything else. And our brains are good at generating ideas but not storing them. I've always been really interested in building a creative business and making systems that support my music making, so I've started to share some of my thoughts about that in my weekly email and on my blog. Last week's post was actually triggered by Cal Newport's podcast Deep Questions, which I listen to while I run, and which makes me strangely much faster than I was before. And Cal quoted photographer Chuck Close, who said, "Inspiration is for amateurs." Now, one of my favourite quotes ever is attributed to Picasso, and I've mentioned it many times in talks and panels, and even, I think, in my 2015 Edinburgh Fringe show, and he said, "Inspiration finds you working." The dream scenario of wandering about and getting struck down with a brilliant idea for a song, a novel or anything else is very appealing and very seductive, and we hear so much about creative block in the world that the idea of sitting yourself down for scheduled periods of creative work, where you do your best to make stuff, try and fail again, then come back and do it all again tomorrow, sounds strange and maybe a bit boring. And yet that's what actually gets stuff done. That's why I love the quote, "Inspiration finds you working." Inspiration is for amateurs spoke to me because it's incredibly empowering to realise that you have control over at least some of your time, and that what you choose to do with that time can have an effect on your future. And when I say your future, I mean you, me, and everyone really. For example, at the start of the year, I decided to get serious about my physical and mental health, implementing a consistent weekly exercise regime and making time for meditation, reminding myself to drink water, take my vitamins, stuff like that. 7 months in, I feel a world different, and that's only because I consistently did little things every day to help myself, and I tracked them in my notebook because I knew that would encourage me to keep going. Did I fail some days? Of course I did. But not doing something one day doesn't mean you don't do it the next. I've become very good at starting again. Now, not being an amateur doesn't mean you're an expert. I read the quote as being about deciding to be professional in your approach to the thing you're trying to do, not deciding you're an expert and have nothing else to learn. I love being an enthusiastic beginner, humble enough to know that I don't know everything, but professional enough to set myself goals and targets. For instance, on the weekend, I watched a lot of videos about beginners pull-ups, ordered a pull-up bar, and will now be spending regular periods of my time hanging off said bar while listening to podcasts, working up to being able to do a bit more, and then a bit more, and then a bit more. At the moment, I can't imagine a time when I'll be able to lift my chin up above that bar, but I am going to keep trying. And I know that if I keep writing it down in my book, I will keep trying. As someone who makes stuff up for a living, there's something very appealing about activities where obvious progress can be seen and felt. So I'll let you know how I get on. And now, to today's exciting guest. Nikesh Shukla is an award-winning, best-selling writer of books and television. So far, he's published 3 novels and 2 books for young adults, co-written a short film, written columns for The Observer magazine, and hosted a podcast. Nikesh is the editor of the essay collection The Good Immigrant, where 21 British writers of colour discuss race and immigration in the UK. The Good Immigrant USA, co-edited with Chimene Suleyman, was released to acclaim from New York Times, Kirkus, Time Magazine, Publishers Weekly, and more. His new book, Brown Baby, a memoir of race, family and home, is due out in early 2021 and can be pre-ordered now from wherever you get books. Nikesh and I had this conversation what feels like a very long time ago now, on Friday the 3rd of April 2020, which was only the end of the second week of the COVID-19 UK lockdown. The months since then seem to have simultaneously flown by in a blur and crawled along slow as treacle, so I'm especially thankful for the opportunity to speak to all of these wonderfully creative people about their approach to their craft and their lives in good times and bad, and to you for supporting that by listening. Just before we get started, I wanted to flash up a content alert for friendly swearing, and for way too many brilliant sounding book recommendations. This could be an expensive episode for all of us, but it is a very rewarding one. Onwards. So hi.
Hi.
Hello. I've seen you a lot on the internet this week, I feel like.
Yeah, I've I've been wasting a lot of time on the internet wondering what the fuck to do. Oh shit! Sorry, can I swear?
Yes.
Oh,
You're very good at it as well, aren't you?
fucking professional, mate.
This podcast isn't really for children. You're fine.
Okay,
I
good.
hadn't considered them as a demographic of mine ever, really.
I always feel really weird in podcast records because it just takes me a minute to settle into it.
This is just the warm up.
Okay, cool. Because I always feel like I'm figuring out what's my personality for each podcast.
Yeah. Well, for me as well, it's all this sort of kerfuffle of starting and recording and everything, and then trying to, put people at their ease. And now, of course, we're doing it all remotely, which is a bit weirder, even though we're just down the road from each other, really. So this podcast recording was obviously going to be in person in the Watershed in Bristol. I was really looking forward to it. I like sitting there. It's nice. But no one's sitting there at the moment.
I know, it's a bit sad.
Not for a while. It's really sad. How have you been coping with what's going on right now?
I've been drinking a lot. I've been staying up really late watching old animated Spider-Man series on Disney Plus. I have been FaceTiming with a lot of friends. I have been getting disproportionately angry at my children. And I've just been fantasizing about getting on a train to nowhere. I don't know, like every day feels really different. Like a couple of days ago, I felt really low. And today I feel, there's someone I'm mentoring to write a novel. And she is an actor, and she just said, do you want me to teach your children Bharatanatyam dancing over Skype as a thank you? And I was like, yeah. And so we just did that for the last hour, and that was like the most wholesome hour ever.
Oh, so lovely.
It was really lovely. Like she's really funny and lovely, and my kids were just really transfixed by this new thing, and we all sort of joined in, and I got to just be goofy dad for like an hour. It was really nice.
Yeah. Are they old enough to understand what's going on, your kids?
I mean, yes and no. Like, yes, they understand the words. There is a virus, and that means people get very sick, and therefore we have to stay at home so we don't catch it and spread it to people. They understand those words, but they don't actually understand what it actually means. It's sort of a bit abstract for them.
Yeah. So it's not scary then, or is it scary for them?
I think it's more sad than scary because they can't see family members, and they can't they can't go to school, and they can't go to nursery, which I think is hard for them. Like they're out of routine, and instead we're establishing a new routine called Disney Plus and aborted attempts at homeschooling.
Right. I feel so much for parents right now. It's because I'm finding it hard to deal with the existential horror and dread, let alone if I had to look after some small people as well. I don't know whether that maybe it would be better because I could concentrate on that. I don't know. I don't have kids, so
I don't know. You definitely feel very cooped up. I've been thinking a lot about, I guess, people in the West who live by themselves, who might be feeling really isolated, but also like just people who don't have the privilege of being able to socially distance. and that I've been thinking about that a lot. You know, you've seen all these sort of really sad, tragic videos of like migrant workers in like India and Pakistan who they live where they work, and now because where they work has closed, they've got to cram it into really busy trains and go back to villages and small towns all over India where they might not necessarily be well received because the country is in lockdown, and they are bringing they might be carrying something with them. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it makes me feel very privileged to be able to say I have a place that we can just be in, and that's where we are for the indefinite future. You know, that to me feels like a huge privilege that I have to keep reminding myself of when I get that sort of cabin fever, when I just want to fling open the door and run barefoot down the street and like bang on the doors of my local pub and go, let me in, please sir, let me in.
I hear you on all of that. I mean, it's very hard to kind of complain about your broadband speed at this time, even if you need it to be fast to do something like I did yesterday, with the knowledge, of course, that all of that stuff's going on in other countries. So I don't feel I have any right to complain about absolutely anything that's happening in my life. And yet I am still sad and full of, horror and dread and things.
Yeah.
And so it's that thing of like, I know I'm still allowed to feel things, but I find it very hard to express that when I know there's people who are in so much worse position than me.
Yeah, and it's sort of like life is complicated, right? Because also those migrant workers will also have issues with connectivity. I really remember Tedry Cole, I'm paraphrasing now, but he wrote this series of tweets where he was like, I hate the phrase first world problems. It decomplicates people in, quote unquote developing nations, that they can't have banal problems like can't get a latte or the Wi-Fi is down. They can have those problems and be irritated by them and still also be facing like disease and poverty and like, structural inequality and all the rest of it. It's wrong of us to sort of decomplicate huge groups of people by assuming that they don't have banal problems as well. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective to think about, because I guess my big existential thing that I'm thinking about is like, what happens next? Like, has the world paused, or is this the kind of the reflective moment before a change? Like, do we pause and then like in 3 months' time we go back to whatever lives we all had? Or does this exacerbate and tribalize inequality in a way that we don't quite understand how bad it could get or how deeper it can get? Or is this the moment where we kind of go, we need to make some changes? And that's kind of what I'm really wrestling with at the moment. And it's really hard to create in that time of like global, like a global pause, whatever that pause means for whoever around the world.
And again, that pause is another mark of privilege, isn't it? Because for me, it's a pause. And for someone else, it's definitely not a pause. But it's interesting what you said. Yeah, that I think the sort of infantilization of, again, the inverted commas, developing nations and people in those nations by mostly, I would say, white people over the years has been one of the sources of just the worst evil behavior from white people. And continuing to do that and to sort of assuming that people's inner lives in Africa or India are smaller than ours, like that they can't get sad about not being able to connect Skype or what have you, or that they wouldn't even be using it. Like, not everyone in another country is in a field only thinking about, providing for their kids and things that day. That's so reductive, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
I've just read the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, and I just was crying my eyes out for about the second half of this very big book. So that's really sticking with me at the moment. Have you read that yet?
No, I remember being sent it to read by an ex-girlfriend and reading the back and going, and just really making an awful judgment about it, going, oh, white savior fiction. And I never read it.
Yeah, I hear that.
But, obviously, I'm sure because, she's a well-loved and well-respected novelist, I'm sure it's a lot more complex than that. But I was only 17 at the time, I think, when I got sent it, or maybe older, maybe 18, I can't remember. But I never read it. I had it on my shelf for years and just never bothered with it.
I feel like when a book is that big, like, I have no problem reading a big book, obviously, but choosing to read one and being sent one is very different, I feel. If it was like, I think it's like 1,000 pages, maybe 800 pages. It's quite a decent, hefty tome. Do I have it? I thought I had it on my desk because I was going to show it off on the internet last night, but I didn't. Oh, it's over there. Yeah, there's loads of pages in it. Anyway.
Loads of pages.
Loads of pages. What I'm finding interesting is that in our privileged bubble of, broadband and what have you, and a global pause, people seem to be suddenly realizing that you can do things like live streaming, Zoom calls, Skype, and all sorts of things that have been around for years and years. So for me, on the musical side of things, I'm watching people suddenly become even worse show-offs. I'm finding it a bit much.
Yeah, while I might do the occasional Instagram live, I will never click on your Instagram live. Not you, Laura. not you specifically. I just mean you, audience.
I feel hurt, but I will continue with the interview.
Yeah, it's funny. I was saying this to a friend last night over Skype, that this is going to kind of do wonders for the meetings that could have been in the email industry that you and I, who don't live in London, are often forced to travel to.
Oh yeah,
at huge great cost to ourselves, and people who might want a 30-minute general meeting about ideas at a TV company in London at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday might not realise that I have a job, B, have to pay for that £60 to £80 train ticket myself, depending on the time I need to get to London, then have to travel within London, then have to feed myself, then have to get back. And, for them, 30 minutes is a full day for me. And we could have just done that on Skype. And they're always like, oh, but vibes, man. It's all about the vibes in the room. You're like, I can do vibes over Skype. It's fine. But also
king of the vibes.
I'm king of vibes, as you can tell. But we were then sort of saying that, and I know it's sort of wanky to kind of parrot like sort of half drunk intellectual conversations you had on FaceTime the night before, like I am doing now. But
that's all we have.
It's all we have. But I was like, there's this. I feel this urgency to get people to stop like narrating their lives in this pause and actually just be in this pause. If you have the privilege of being in this pause, like, it's okay to just be alone with yourself and be alone with your thoughts and kind of work out who am I when the camera's off and Twitter's off and all the rest of it. It's okay to be with your thoughts. You don't have to create content. I think a lot of people are feeling pressure to like write that novel. And I understand that, like, especially it must be hard for like poets and comedians who've had like all of their professional work cancelled. But it's I just think it's also okay to just be with your thoughts and stare out the window and watch crappy television and, I don't know, like, try a recipe that you've never tried before, and or just eat cheese on toast. Like, I think there's so much like bossing, isolation culture, like hustle culture, isolation. I'm just like, guys, it's okay to just stare into space.
But don't you think that people's discomfort with being alone with their thoughts is why they're stuck to their phones in good times as well as bad times?
Yeah, of course.
I feel that way.
Yeah. I'm just as guilty of it. It's made me realise that, like, as my podcast feed stacks up, because I don't, I'm not walking around and cycling around and running around listening to podcasts. It's because I've got this thing where, like, at any point where I could or should be left alone with my thoughts, on the many trains I take to London for a half an hour meeting, or when I'm walking around or what have you, I'm filling my brain. Like, I'm watching something, writing something, reading something, listening to something. I'm never just being at one with the world. And I've just been thinking I should do this more, because I'm not saying that my thoughts are particularly exciting or interesting or or provocative or intellectual, but it's sort of given me pause for some sort of self-reflection, which I think is useful.
Definitely. Now, I do have various questions I was going to ask you, with the disclaimer, of course, that we're in a global pandemic, and I realise that none of this matters now. No offence to your great achievements, but it does feel very frivolous to be talking about stuff like art. But then I watched the live stream conversation you had with Riz Ahmed the other night, and I thought it was really interesting that you were all talking about that stuff, about how, I think the disclaimer was dealt with very well in that, which is that artists create art all the time, and that's what we do. So I'm a songwriter, musician, and what do I do in a time like this? I just do that because that's what I do. I don't do anything else. So what am I supposed to do? So yeah, it feels strange to be inviting people to come and talk on my podcast right now because I appreciate there's more pressing concerns, but also this is what we do. So that's kind of my disclaimer. I hope that's okay.
I mean, imagine if you release this in 6 months' time and the world has returned to normal, and then suddenly you've got this slew of podcasts of people at various stages of isolation going, I'm not doing very well at all.
It's okay, the lattes are coming. They'll be here soon. Give it 3 months. Yeah. But I'm interested to know a few things about you. How would you introduce yourself to a stranger at a party?
Hey, I'm Nikesh. I know Paul from school. I am Grandpa's cousin. I don't know. Which party are we at?
Well, exactly. It's a really vague question. I like your approach to it because your party sounds nice. It doesn't sound full of people who want to know who is the most important person in the room. That's a good party.
Well, yeah, I don't get invited to those parties, so that's fine.
I don't go to any parties, so my answer to that is no answer. What are you here on the planet to do, and when did you figure that out?
I am on the planet to be Grandpa's cousin and the guy that Paul went to school with. And I figured that out when I'm being glib. I still figuring it out. Like, I don't feel like I'm here to tell stories or create art or any of those things. I think I'm just sort of, purpose is something I think about a lot, right? And for me, there's a difference between what am I here to do and what is my purpose. What drives me. I think they're two slightly different things. And I think what drives me is making space for other people. You know, in my various guises throughout the years when I haven't been creating art, I've been a youth worker. I've been like a social integration and community cohesion officer. I've worked for charities. I've worked for lots of non-profits, and the driving force in each of those things was to kind of hammer home the difference between inequality and equality and strive for equity. And I think that my purpose is to kind of do that through the thing that I'm actually good at, which is writing. And so use writing to kind of make space for people and to kind of push us to some form of equality or equity. It's a bit of a wanky answer, but I guess my sort of purpose derives from, like, my mum and my uncle when they moved to the north in like the 60s from Aden. They both ended up in their own way doing like really, really amazing anti-racism work, and that anti-racism work was so localized and so focused on the community that they were in, but it had such a big impact across, for my uncle across the country, and for my mum across Yorkshire. And I'm just constantly reminded and seeing people around me that, you know, as individuals, we can make a difference. Like, one person can make a difference, and if I can do that through the only thing that I'm actually good at, then that kind of gives me purpose.
What a great role model to have as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, they're both amazing role models, and whenever you'd kind of want to celebrate the stuff that they did, they'd always be like, it's just what we did, you know? Like, they didn't, it wasn't a big deal for them. It was just what life was like and what you needed to do. And I really admire that. They weren't doing it for their own ends. They were doing it to make their local areas better.
Yeah. Is it true that you spent your 20s doing bad music? I read that somewhere. I'm sure that was a self-deprecating statement. I'm sure it was great.
No, I did some really shoddy raps. And I know that they were shoddy because I was recently at dinner with two of my friends who I used to do music with, and one of them had their new girlfriend over. And in order to embarrass the friend in front of his new girlfriend, Rob, my mate, put one of our old records on in the background. And when it came to my verse, I just listened to it and I was like, oh God, I was bad. but like 10 years has passed, or like 14 years has passed since I recorded that. So yeah, like my voice was lighter, it didn't have any gravitas, I was sort of waffly. I used to be like a very mediocre rapper.
Mm.
And I was so much more concerned with storytelling over flow and what I sounded like, that I just assumed, because I'd spent a couple of years working with some of the guys out of Asian Dub Foundation, and
Mm.
what they were essentially doing with me was like helping me with my shyness and bringing me out of my shell. But what I thought they were doing was turning me into a Chuck D like political rapper. But I just wasn't very good, because I just didn't work hard enough on the performance angle or the rapping angle. I worked really hard on the lyrics. But the
Mm.
thing I'm sure there's an old story of like the filming of the first Star Wars film when Harrison Ford says to George Lucas, "You can write this shit, but you sure as hell can't say it." And it's very true. Like, on paper, stuff has the rhythm that the writer has given it, but then
Mm.
someone else has to then translate that rhythm into something else. And so that's why a lot of people sometimes struggle with quite lyrical novels, because they're written in the cadence and the rhythm of someone who you need to stick with it long enough till you pick up that rhythm from the author. But
Yeah.
it's the same thing with the raps. Like I would spend ages crafting these raps, and they'd have all these internal rhymes, but they'd be structurally sound as stories. But and I would sort of do all kinds of shit to like maneuver the story round so the story made sense rather than the flow. And actually, I just never spent enough time on it. I was bad.
But you made records though. So you have a record you can listen to.
Yeah, we self-funded some records.
Good work.
Hopefully scrubbed from the internet.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I'm glad that I didn't start making music till I did, because the stuff I made before was awful, and I'm really glad that you can't find it now. Really glad. I'm really glad that YouTube didn't start till when it did either as well, because there's some pretty awful gigs beforehand. I was asking about that because it's just interesting to see the trajectory of it, because it's not like you're trying to make some pop music that had no meaning and then you decided to be a serious writer and activist and what have you. It's more like it seems like it's all part of that journey to where you are now.
Yeah, completely. I think I've always been interested in the same stuff, like from what I wanted to talk about. And it just took me a while to find the right medium for it, which was a novel. But I think what's interesting for me when I think about it is I started off as a comedy writer. So my first novel is a comedy. It's just like a knockabout comedy about a bunch of teenagers who are terrible rappers who basically decide that they're going to form a band in order to kind of keep it real in this private school that they go to. And they just suck, but they don't realize they suck for a really long time. It's kind of like, I mean, that was always the sort of the interesting thing about like Flight of the Conchords, where within the mythology of the show, the band sucks, but actually the song, they don't suck. And that's always like the difficult thing about that show is like you have to try and buy into the fact that the band sucks within the universe, and they don't. But with Coconut Limited, they were bad. The music was bad. They just couldn't see it because they kind of had that teenage bravado masking over some deep-seated like denial going on. And it was me. That was me when I was a rapper. So my first novel was kind of like a tribute to my years as a shit rapper.
I love that. You've got to embrace these things. It's all part of your past, It's interesting.
Yeah. I'm not. I'd be embarrassed if like someone found all of the old music and put it on the internet. And it probably is out there, and you probably can find it somewhere. But it's very much of the time that I made it, and of the headspace that and the talent that I had, which wasn't very good. And I just have to go, you know what? I'm not very good.
Do you think that people have to be better younger now because there's a sort of camera on them if they choose there to be? So, teenagers in bands have to be way better now because it's captured. There's no way of really sucking.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think if everything is documented, it might take you longer to find your voice, because everything's just out there, and you don't have the opportunity to make mistakes and get things wrong and get something sort of half right, but then with time and experience and development and nurturing from the right people, you'll get it to where it needs to be, which I was sort of very lucky to have with the novels. Like the first 2 novels I wrote, and I really like them, I'm really proud of them, and I think they're good novels, but it was only because of the kind of post Good Immigrant nurturing that I had from like editors and like people around me that I kind of nailed what I was trying to do, you know? So yeah, I think that is hard, but also like it is hard if, you know, I know caveat this with being 40. Sorry, Dad Shukla. But I imagine it's quite hard to like to have every aspect of your development documented on the internet, because we've all said and done and been ropey people at various parts of the development of our lives. And it's who you are when you've kind of gone through that journey and become the person that you need to be and have the voice that you want to have, that really matters. And I've said and done some like shocking stuff in like my teenage years that I'm not proud of, but what I learned from those moments and how I kind of moved on from those moments and how I kind of acknowledged the people that I would have hurt as a teenager in those moments made me who I am today, you know? Yeah. That's sort of part of our development.
I was super shy as a teenager. It was really hard for me to sing in front of anybody. But listening back to little snippets of stuff that was recorded, I now can appreciate I was actually really good, especially for my age. I was really good. It's very hard for me to say that out loud, but I was good. I just have to embrace it. It's okay to praise oneself once in a while. But at the time, of course, I didn't think I was at all. And most of the time, I don't think that about myself. But if someone had had a camera in my face, I definitely wouldn't have gone to those auditions. And if someone had been commenting about my performances, I definitely wouldn't have done another one. You know, I wouldn't have pushed myself because it would have been like a scared little animal trying to come out of a box. I don't know why it's in a box, and then someone scares it back in the box. That would have been me, definitely. A short pause now to thank the people who are powering this episode with their monthly membership of the Correspondence Club. Hello, and thank you. If you'd like to join us, come and browse my website and find what suits you, with members' perks including a quarterly zine and music bundle, secret podcast episodes, access to our friendly forum, t-shirts, badges, cover songs, podcast sponsorship, and of course some top-notch music, some of which you've heard in this podcast already. Visit penfriend.rocks/join to choose your tier, and remember there will always be a free option too. I have another gift for you today, 2 months of free online classes with Skillshare. I've learned so much since signing up myself last year, from new video editing software to 3-point lighting to personal essay writing, and there are tons of short and more in-depth courses in all sorts of creative endeavours. So head to penfriend.rocks/Skillshare to claim your 2 free months and let me know how you get on. Now, back to my conversation with Nikesh. You do lots of different kinds of writing. So how do you approach that, and which is your favourite? Where do you feel most comfortable? Or most uncomfortable in a nice way?
I think novels are my natural home. I kind of fell into writing non-fiction. I fell into doing journalism as a way of kind of getting my writing out there. Then when your novel comes out, you kind of have to pitch to do lots and lots of journalistic pieces around the novel to kind of help promote the work. And so journalism was never like a comfortable fit for me. I don't have the mindset for it. But then I've always really loved reading literary essays, be it like Zadie Smith or Gia Tolentino or like Leslie Jameson or Hilton Als or people like that. And I just thought that there wasn't a huge tradition of people in the UK doing that. When I'd read a book by Ta-Nehisi Coates and a book by Claudia Rankine, and that's when I kind of thought maybe I could add to the canon of British literary essays about race, and that's kind of where The Good Immigrant kind of came from. And then after that, I ended up doing a lot more journalism, a lot more non-fiction stuff, and that was never really the natural fit. I love fiction. Fiction is my jam. Fiction is my jam. Sounds so crap. But like fiction is where I feel most comfortable. I think fiction for me offers clarity. Fiction for me offers complexity. It gives me the space to be complicated. I'm not as good a non-fiction writer that I can write about other people in a complicated fashion. I can only really write about myself. I really like the mechanics of storytelling, and I just feel like fiction allows me to utilize those skills to the best of my ability. So yeah, I think writing a novel for me always comes from like a really central question that I'm interrogating either of myself or of the world. And the first book was very much asking myself about self-delusion and like self-denial, and whether all of the stuff that I did as a teenager that I shouldn't have been doing, like being in crappy bands and stuff, actually led me to be the person that I'm meant to be. And how, it was very much the central question of the novel is like, what are the building blocks of ourselves as adults that we start using as teenagers? And then the second novel, like the central question was pretty much, if we're all online now and we're curating parts of our personality for online, and that might lead us to kind of tell fictions about ourselves online in order to make it narratively interesting or whatnot, what does that mean for us when we're not online? And I'm really fascinated by that idea of like, we've been talking about it, but like people who are constantly like self-narrating on the internet, like what happens when, and it's happened to me where I've like stretched the truth a little bit, or like often like 2 or 3 incidents might become one incident in the space of a tweet. And then you kind of see someone in the street that and they're like, oh, I saw online that X happened. And you're like, oh yeah, didn't quite happen that way. Or, and I was really fascinated by that, and that's kind of what the second novel became. And so, like all the, to kind of go back to that question, you're asking how does a novel start? Like, it often starts for me with a question, and from that question, I build out characters, and from those characters, I build out a story that ultimately answers the question. And then once I have a story that answers the question, I start to think about what actually happens, because they're sort of two different things. And then that's how a novel gets built. I really remember Craig Mazin, who wrote Chernobyl, talking about When Harry Met Sally, and how if most fictions, be they films or TVs or books, if most fictions start from some sort of central thematic argument, the glory of that film is that the central thematic argument is presented in the first 5 minutes of the film as an argument between the two main characters, where they kind of fall out over whether men and women can ever be friends, or does sex always get in the way. And for the rest of the film, they're always on different sides of the argument. And like, interestingly, sometimes they're both on opposite ends to where they started, but ultimately what they're both doing is coming to like a midpoint between those two opposites. And that's, I think that's how most novels work. Most novels have that sort of thesis, synthesis, antithesis thing of like, you present an idea or you present a conflict, you then resolve it externally, then you resolve it internally, and that new reality creates another moment of conflict, a new moment of drama.
Do you work with the hero's journey idea as well?
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm obsessed with superhero stuff, so the hero's journey is always there, whether it's kind of obvious or not. Certainly in both of my YAs, they both follow the hero's journey thing, and I'm not like, there tends to be 3 different types of protagonist in a lot of these things, where like all the protagonists, something in them needs to change, and there's always like one protagonist will always want something more and be open to change. Another type of protagonist will always be resistant to change, and the third type of protagonist will always be oblivious to change, or oblivious to the possibility of change. And that I think about all this stuff quite a lot,
Yeah. I think I used to have this impression that people would sit down and just write, and I didn't think it came out exactly as it is on the page. Of course, I'm not that silly, but I did think people just sat down and wrote, and then some stuff came out, and then they'd edit it into something. And only really in the past few years, when I've started realizing that songs are also ways of telling stories, whether you are aware of it or not, that's what they are, and you can approach it a little bit more formally like that and maybe make them better and stronger as well. Then I started reading about all this stuff, the Joseph Campbell hero's journey thing, and being more interested in writing prose myself and things like that. And so I just find it so interesting because there's a lot of parallels, I think. When I come up with an album, I'm interested in the way you talked about it as being a question, because that probably would be a really interesting way of doing one. But it's always about like, what are the themes? And then so the songs come out from there, I suppose. I'm just always interested in comparing different kinds of art forms to see what I can steal from someone else so I can improve the thing I'm doing. So I love talking to people who do different things.
Yeah, but I think a lot of writers feel very icky about the fact that a lot of themes boil down to cliches and idioms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's okay. Like, the theme of Finding Nemo is, if you love something, set it free.
Right.
You know, and I think that's okay, you know. Maybe Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall is A Stitch in Time Saves Nine. I don't know. But I think a lot of writers find that quite icky. And I think that I've been always quite open about it, because I think heavily highbrow literature people like to shroud the mechanics of writing it in sort of mystery and make it quite opaque. And I just think ultimately you can do whatever you want in your novel. You can have two people falling in and out of love for 5 years, or you could have a meteorite hurtling towards Earth, or someone finding a dead body in their trunk and they don't remember how they got there, or whatever it is. But as long as you're invested in the character and you're invested in like the thematic journey that they're going on, even if that's a fucking cliche, that's okay. You know, we choose what happens, but what it's about is something that it's really okay to kind of think about it in terms of like what people find, what people recognize within themselves. I know like the word relatability is often bandied about, and I sort of balk at the word, because I think relatability is quite I think relatability assumes a default position, which is often like white middle class, city based and heterosexual and able-bodied, etc. Relatable is often like that sort of that hero's journey, that sort of yearning for something more, or that yearning to get back to where you started, is something that we can all relate to. So I think relatability is often about the kind of the core journey that most characters go through, rather than whether you relate to a character's circumstances. And often we won't relate to a character's circumstances. Like people who balk about like, oh, I read this novel featuring these people of colour and I just couldn't see myself in them at all. I found it very
Jesus.
Opposite. But they'll kind of read hundreds and hundreds of like detective novels set in Chicago with like a hard-boiled detective who drinks too much and is shitty to his wife, you know? When was the last time we went to Chicago, mate?
Oh God, that stuff makes me so angry, because I think Robin Ince said, he's got a brilliant way of talking about this, as he has a brilliant way of talking about most things, but about how you wouldn't want to read something and then be changed by it. What a terrible result, you know. You wouldn't want to learn from something you're spending time on.
But at the same time, I do believe that, you know, I do agree with Robin that we want to read and engage in art in order to feel changed, in order to learn something about ourselves and about the world out there, and often that kind of points us towards reading perspectives that aren't our own. But I think that only really works if your perspective is already well wrought.
Yeah.
So like, there is the canon of relatability, the canon of the default is the white dude, and therefore they can go and read Chimamanda Adichie and sort of feel changed by it, because the lens through which they see themselves is the default through which they can see other people as sort of different to them, and can kind of teach them something about themselves and about other people. But going back to that idea I talked about at the beginning about equity, I feel like in order for me as a person of colour to read widely, I need to read about myself as the default first.
Yes. Yeah.
I need to see the mirror before I can look out the window. I know it's a shit metaphor, but I guess what I'm trying to say is like, once I look at myself and I don't see myself as the outsider, I don't see myself as other, when I see myself as a default position, then I can read other people's perspectives and have that teach me something about myself. That's why a lot of my work tends to kind of try and rewrite the canon to feature interesting people of color. It winds me up. Used to wind me up when I get rejections based on the relatability of those characters, because I think relatable to who?
Yeah.
Going back to my dude Teju Cole, like I miss him on Twitter. I think it's nearly been 10 years since he's not been on Twitter. Well, no, 5 years since he's not been on Twitter. But his bio just says "we who," and I'm like, yeah, man, we who.
Yeah. The Good Immigrant was a big book for me because it's easy to think you know about some of this stuff, but reading that book made me realise I didn't know anywhere near as much as I thought I did about it. Of course I don't.
Well, it's interesting. Kind of going back to the intention of The Good Immigrant, I kind of had to refix my intention on it after it launched, because when we launched the crowdfunder for it in 2015, it was about trying to diversify publishing, going, I know loads of sick writers. These are the kinds of writers who should have book deals. And if these 20 books that these writers can write came out, we would do a significant amount of rewriting contemporary British literature. But then by the time the book came out, Brexit had happened, and people were having lots of conversations about the immigrant experience. And I kind of, yes, I set them the linking strand of race and immigration to write about because it felt pertinent at the time. But I was asked a lot, who is this for? Who is this for? And because I'd get like liberal white people go, what? Obviously I'm not a racist, and I thought the book was fantastic, but I didn't really learn anything. Like, how are you going to get this book into the hands of the people who really need to read it?
Wow.
And it just made me think. I just had this realization where I was like, rah, I think people think that we put this book together so they could gift it to their racist Uncle Chris for Christmas, and then racist Uncle Chris will read it and go, you know what? I hold my hand up. Got it wrong. Turns out immigrants are all right. And I just thought that was a really naive position for a lot of people. And so, weirdly, I didn't write it for white people. I realized in October, like a couple of weeks after the book had come out, we did this big show at Manchester Literature Festival. And we did an hour's reading, and this packed out audience. Like, it was amazing. Like, so many people came out. And the signing queue was 2 hours long, and the event had only been an hour long. I'd say 75% of the signing queue was young people of colour, like under 30. And I was standing next to Inwa Ellams, my homie, who contributed to the book, and we were signing books, and we were marvelling at how everyone was like, thank you for doing this. I feel really seen by this. I feel really represented by this, and that's really powerful for me. And it made me remember when I was 14 years old, I read The Buddha of Suburbia for the first time. And I read it as an outsider kid who didn't fit into his home life, and he didn't fit into his school life, didn't have much of a social life, and I felt abnormal. And then I read the opening line to that, my name is Kareem Amir, and I'm an Englishman through and through, almost. And that one word, almost, rattled around my brain. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. That's me on the page. This is me. This is my book. And it's had such a visceral impact on me in like 1994 when I read it. And I realised in Manchester Literature Festival, I realised who this book was for in that moment. We were giving people their Buddha of Suburbia experience. We were giving people the book that they could hold up and go, this is my default position now. And that's who this book was for. It was for a generation of young people of colour who felt so marginalised, felt like constantly attacked in the press that they weren't integrating enough, because often the press conflates integration and assimilation. Assimilation is, I will take my ethnic hat off and I'll wear your white hat, whereas integration is, we will stand together and we will acknowledge our differences and the things that make us the same. And we can all have a society based on difference and based on common goals, but also common differences. And that's okay, And I just realized in that moment that that's who this book was for. It was for those kids because they felt fucking angry. They felt weird. They felt abnormal. They felt like they didn't belong in the same way that I felt. And this book could be for them. This book could be their Buddha of Suburbia.
When I read it, I felt very much that I assumed that that's what the intention of it was. I just felt lucky to be able to have that collection, to see so many different people's perspectives in one go.
Yeah.
And really educate myself about some stuff, which, like I said, I thought I had done, philosophically, but I hadn't done. And so I'm always recommending that book to people. I sadly don't have a racist Uncle Chris, but I just think I don't know, I just feel like it's everyone's responsibility to do all the things they can to educate the people around them in all the different ways. And for me, it's interesting you said about the first line of the Buddha of Suburbia, because stories can just have that impact in one sentence, like you say.
Yeah, completely.
No pressure.
But that's why I'm so adamant that kids and teenagers need these books more than adults, because if they have them as kids and teenagers, then by the time they get to adults, they are rounded enough they have enough imagination to accept a black James Bond or a female Ghostbuster. They can suspend their disbelief enough for the running, jumping, climbing trees of a James Bond film and the fact that he's black, or they can suspend their disbelief enough for a world where ghosts need busting and 4 women can bust those ghosts.
Exactly.
You know, those two things, they just
well put.
They show me the utter lack of imagination that the British have and Americans have, because they can imagine all of these different worlds, but all of these different worlds have to be inhabited by the default position of the white dude. You know, I turned Game of Thrones off when I realised that all of the people of colour were barbarians and savages and shifty thieves. And I was just like, you know what? This isn't even a real world. You know, this isn't even a real world. You can cast this world however the fuck you want, and yet this is what you chose. And I just thought, you know what, it can be brilliant, but if that lack of imagination when it comes to the casting just wasn't there for me. And you know, I can watch stuff with white people, and I watch Succession. It's the whitest show ever because it's about white privilege, but it's brilliant. But at the same time, I kind of just need the people making these shows to have a bit more imagination.
Yeah. It's just lazy, I think, at this point.
It's really lazy.
Speaking of lazy, you do loads of different other things as well, don't you? So you've got the Good Journal. You've got a literary agency. But I was a little bit sad to find out that you did quite a lot of podcasts, but you stopped. You stopped doing them, didn't you? Are you going to do any more?
Yes. So I did a podcast, kind of like freewheeling chats with authors, kind of inspired by Mark Maron, but I stopped them in 2013. Like, they were really popular, and I got really amazing guests like Zadie Smith and Juno Diaz, and like if I'd kept going, I probably could have got whoever I wanted. But I was recording it myself and I was editing it myself, and it's that poor attention to the sound that failed me in my rap career, that failed me in my podcasting career. And I was just like, I don't have the attention to detail to record this properly and edit this properly. And I can't afford to pay a producer to do it. And also in 2013, there weren't as many podcast producers as there are around now. And so I just, and it was time as well, because I was living in Bristol. They were much easier to record when I was living in London. But when I was living in Bristol, I just, you know, it was going to cost me a lot of money, or I'd have to record stuff over Skype. And like 6-7 years ago, the technology wasn't as good as it is now. So I stopped doing it. But so I've got a book coming out next February called Brown Baby, which is a memoir about being a parent of mixed race children and about trying to find joy in sort of a bleak, weird world. And I'm doing a podcast with it alongside it that's being supported by my publisher, so it'll be recorded properly, and we'll have some really good guests.
That's really good.
Yeah, we've got some really good guests lined up for it. That I kind of, on the off chance that this sort of strange times that we live in mean that schedules don't line up when we actually get round to recording it, I won't name them in case like schedules change and stuff. But yeah, I've got some really good guests.
Excellent. Oh, that's really exciting. And I was flippantly skipping over your brilliant journal and literary agency. Would you like to talk about those?
Well, yeah, so the journal, we did 4 issues of a journal. And yeah, just to kind of finish the point I was trying to make about why we did The Good Immigrant, the thing about doing a book about race and immigration is like you end up meeting loads and loads of writers who are a bit like, I'm glad that book's popular, but like, we can't just always write about race and immigration issues all the time. And you're like, yeah, that is a fair point. And a lot of writers who are like, I write sci-fi, but you know, if you do a follow-up, I'd be happy to try and do something for you. And I was like, you know what? If the stretching culture and the carving out space thing is about making room for more diversity of writer, then we have to be critical in terms of which types of like being as diverse as possible with the types of writer we're sort of stretching culture for. And so doing the journal was me kind of going, well, we did the race and immigration thing, now you've got space to do whatever you want and it will kind of get the same amount of attention as A Good Immigrant. And that was really powerful, and like loads of those writers have like gone on to big things. And the agency, my literary agent and I set up an agency to represent people from marginalized backgrounds, because diversity isn't just about, and inclusion isn't just about race, it's about all of the things that the default keeps it in the margins. And because I had mentored a bunch of writers, and they and in the wake of I'm not saying because of The Good Immigrant, but not long after The Good Immigrant, when I was mentoring them, they went on to really, really big book deals with books that have been hugely successful. And my agent was like, if we could find a model where we match the mentoring with the selling of the books, then that's quite interesting. So we set up this agency as well.
Is that your job then? You're talking about having a day job? So
I do a day a week on that. And I teach, and I'm doing lots of like, I'm in development in a lot of like TV projects that will probably never get made, but I think that's just the way that TV works. So you develop 10 projects and one of them might get made.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about TV is they have money to develop people, which I think is really interesting, because like I sort of feel like if I was a publisher, I wouldn't want to like buy a specific book off a writer. I'd want to identify writers I want to work with and pay them to fuck about with an end goal, and buy their time and space to kind of fuck about in the hope that they'll kind of create something amazing eventually. Like I'm developing like 3 or 4 TV shows with different places. And yeah, like we might get to a point where none of them get made, but the relationship, they've essentially paid for my development, and we might find something else to work on together. And that's really exciting, you know?
That sounds like how the record industry used to work, or seemed to used to work. Doesn't now.
Yeah.
How has the internet impacted your career, and what's your relationship with it at the moment?
I mean, the internet has been very integral in my career. The internet is how I found a project that Josie Long was running in like 2008 called 100 Days to Make Myself a Better Person, where I started writing things that would become my first novel. Because of the internet, I went viral for sending a lamb chop into space to promote my second novel. Because of the internet, I've been able to build up this really important community of writers of colour. Because of the internet, I've been able to expand my readership in a really, really brilliant ways. My relationship with it now is, I mean, we're talking like thick pandemic vibes. I'm obsessed. I just like scrolling endlessly. Because what I found I'm doing is, instead of dealing with the actual reality of there being a global pandemic, I'm just obsessively reading tweets on how shit our government's response has been, and that's probably not healthy. I probably need to focus on the other stuff, but I can control my feelings towards my government more than I can control what's happening out in the world.
This is it. Now, I want to respect your time, but I also want to ask a couple more questions at the end. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. So, who are your current favourite writers that we should be reading?
A good question. I really love Gia Tolentino's essays. I love everything Zadie Smith does. I love everything Niven Govindan does. Everything that Gary Steingart and Colson Whitehead do. Nikita Lalwani. I'm looking around my bookshelves. Recently, I read Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, which is a really amazing, and Nudibranch by Erenison Okosi. Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendez as well. That's a really, really special book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find time to read a lot? Because, I mean, obviously you're a writer, you should be reading, but you have children too.
Yeah,
How does that work?
I give myself an hour every day to read. So like half of that will be reading for fun before bed, and then half an hour of that will be reading for work during the day. Usually just after lunch, just after I've eaten is when I read. Because I think it's important to kind of structure my days, because I'm so in the headspace of having had a full-time job for so long that if I don't structure my days, then I won't get anything done. I'll just turn on Netflix and go, oh, I'm going to watch Netflix for research.
Yes, the lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
What 3 pieces of your work would you recommend to new readers?
I mean, The Good Immigrant and The Good Immigrant USA are great books. I think I really stand by them. I'm really immensely proud of them and everything that they've done for culture and for society and for me and for the writers involved in both of those editions. My novel, The One Who Wrote Destiny, is probably my most accomplished novel. It just says everything I've ever wanted to say. And The Boxer, which is my a book I wrote for teenagers, all about the trauma of a racist attack and someone taking on boxing in the aftermath. It's probably the most personal novel I've ever written.
Amazing, thank you. And who would you like to hear on this podcast in future?
I'd like to hear Laura Kidd interviewed. I think that would be quite interesting.
What? That would be turning the tables on me. That's scary. It's very scary.
I'd love the Etherington brothers, Bobby and Lorenzo Etherington. They both do comics for kids, and they both also do these books for adults called like How to Think While You Draw and How to Think While You Write. And they're both really obsessed with craft. And if this is a thing that kind of gets behind the artist's mind and sort of interrogates their approach to their craft, I imagine they'd be interesting people to chat to. And they're bonkers as well, so they'd be quite fun.
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
And they're Bristol based.
Oh, that's good. So if and when we're allowed to go out again, I could actually meet them. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
All right. And finally then, what's your next adventure?
I'm going to go for a run tomorrow. A government sanctioned run.
That's the first thing I thought, by the way, when our Prime Minister was saying, you can go for a run. I was like, I don't want to now. Like I've been doing it. I took it up again about 2 months ago, and I've been going twice a week. And I used to run a lot, and then I didn't for ages and whatever. And I was really got really back into it. And then he said that, and I was just like, I can't let him ruin my running for me just because he says it's all right. So I have been going. I'm glad you're going. Is it new for you, or is it a thing you do a lot? Are you a runner already?
I've run a couple of half marathons.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know what my next adventure will be. I'm really craving the seaside. So as soon as I can, I just need to go and look at the sea and hear the sea.
Yeah, that sounds like a noble. What's the word? Goal. Why can't I speak? That sounds like a noble goal. I hope you get to do it very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know about you, but I now have a reading list as long as my arm, and I can't wait to start finding out more about all the writers Nikesh mentioned in today's episode. I've made it super easy for you to follow up on everything we discussed by collating all the links in one handy webpage. Visit penfriend.rocks/Nikesh for that. That's penfriend.rocks/NIKESH. And remember, you can pre-order Nikesh's new book, Brown Baby, now. I can't wait to read it. If you're enjoying Attention Engineer, please consider sharing it online. All the episodes are available at penfriend.rocks/podcast, and subscribe links for all the major platforms are there as well. Your star ratings and reviews are very much appreciated. It means so much to hear from you each week. I obviously hope people would enjoy these conversations, which is why I started the podcast in the first place. So it really is lovely to find out that you are. Thank you. Join me next week for my conversation with musician Emma Pollock, founding member of the Delgados and stellar solo artist. Take care.